To understand the ancient world around 2600 BCE, we have to look at how a society chose to distribute its limited resources. Millions of hours of human labor had to go somewhere. In Egypt, the elite prioritized monumental projects, pouring those resources into the sand to build massive tombs for god-kings. In Mesopotamia, leadership invested heavily in massive ziggurat temple complexes to project divine and royal authority. This presents a choice for any early civilization. When you command a workforce, do you invest in massive monuments for the elite, or do you build practical infrastructure for the population? The Harappan, or Indus Valley Civilization, was a notable anomaly. They bypassed vanity monuments entirely, choosing instead extreme civic standardization. This chart maps ancient priorities. The horizontal axis measures daily civic utility. The vertical measures vanity projects. Egypt and Mesopotamia land high on vanity, but Harappa sits in the opposite corner. High utility, low vanity. This network spanned modern-day Pakistan and Western India, outscaling the Egyptian and Mesopotamian territories combined. How do you enforce perfect urban order across thousands of miles? And what are the hidden costs of optimizing an entire civilization purely for trade and logistics? Let's compare them systematically. This matrix evaluates Harappa against its contemporaries, starting with building technology. Egyptian engineers built common infrastructure using raw, sun-dried mud bricks. They were cheap and easy to make, but they struggled against the elements. Harappa chose a much harder path. They harvested millions of tons of timber to fire kilns, baking bricks at high temperatures for complete standardization. The immediate payoff was incredibly durable multi-story buildings that could withstand harsh weather and the brutal monsoon seasons. Baked bricks also made sophisticated hydraulic engineering possible, providing the foundation for structures like the Great Bath at Mohenjo Daro. Notice the exactness of the steps. They lined the floor and walls with waterproof mortar to ensure the tank held water perfectly. Harappa secured long-term structural integrity and public hygiene. But baking millions of bricks required vast deforestation. Stripping the tree cover likely triggered microclimate changes that would eventually destabilize their society. Moving to the next column on our matrix, urban layout. Harappans planned their cities on a rigorous grid system. Main streets intersected at perfect 90-degree angles. Looking at the excavated ruins, we can still see the rigid alignment of these ancient avenues. They organized their settlements logically, dividing them into a raised, fortified citadel for administration and a lower town for the general public. This grid provided unmatched public sanitation. Almost every home featured a private well and courtyard, flushing waste into a fully covered geometric street drainage system. The trade-off here is control. You get exceptional public health, but enforcing a grid this precise required an incredibly strict administration, likely a merchant oligarchy. There was little room for organic community expansion. Our final matrix column reveals the engine behind it all: trade mechanics. To supply their cities, they managed an expansive overland and maritime logistics network, pulling copper from Rajasthan and tin from Afghanistan. They held a monopoly on processing high-end luxury goods, like brilliant blue lapis lazuli, exporting it to the elites of foreign empires. To handle the maritime volume, they engineered dedicated port infrastructure, including a massive brick-lined naval dockyard right on the Arabian Sea at Lothal. Harappa achieved total economic dominance, stretching to Mesopotamia without using a single minted coin. The entire empire ran on a complex barter system. They maintained quality control across thousands of miles using uniform stone weights and square clay seals, which served as defining markers of trade authority. This logistics network generated deep trust and massive wealth, but relying entirely on physical barter meant they lacked economic flexibility. Without liquid currency, they couldn't quickly pivot when the supply lines broke down. This hyper-optimized economic machine ran smoothly for centuries. Then, around 1800 BCE, the underlying environmental variables changed. Tectonic plates shifted, rainfall patterns altered. The crucial rivers that watered their crops and carried their cargo began drying up and changing course. Old history books often blamed a violent Aryan invasion, but modern evidence points to a slow suffocation. Their tightly coupled, logistics-heavy society simply couldn't adapt to a sudden ecosystem collapse. A highly tuned, interconnected system is brilliant in a stable environment, but when the world turns hostile, that exact same rigidity becomes a fatal trap. Here is the final scorecard for the Harappan blueprint. They earn top marks in standardized logistics, public health, and trade supremacy. They fail on flexibility and environmental sustainability. For those studying for an exam, memorize the baked bricks, the strict 90-degree grids, remember Lothal's port, and the absence of deciphered currency or giant vanity temples. For systems thinkers, Harappa proves that a superpower can be built strictly on practical infrastructure, rather than military conquest or religious dominance. The Indus Valley engineers built an unparalleled civic machine, but their story leaves us with a stark reminder.